Shaylin, and welcome to the start of another video. So today is going to be another writing vlog. This is going to be mildly unconventional because this is actually the very end of the vlog. I've filmed the rest of it, but the first couple clips that I filmed for this vlog were so bad. They were just awful. I started working on this vlog actually at the end of June, so it's literally been 2 months. And the point of this vlog was to chronicle my revisions for my novel Honey Vinegar, starting the developmental editing process and then starting to revise the first few chapters. The first few clips, which was like 20 minutes of footage, were just god awful. Not saying this is amazing, but I had been doing a lot of my writing outside on my patio. Not here, this is my mom's house, but at my house, I'd been writing out on the patio just because normally, when we're not in a pandemic, I would go places to write. My school that I no longer attend, or coffee shops. I just go places, especially when I was feeling stagnant and like I needed a bit of a productivity boost. That was like something I relied on a lot. Just leaving the house to feel productive. I would probably do that a couple times a week. And without that, I'd been feeling just uninspired and like I didn't have a way to get out of this like any kind of productivity rut, because that's how I would get out of my productivity rut, is I would go write somewhere else and kind of make a day of it. Sorry, this piece of my hair is just gonna be like that. I know it's bothering everyone. I would kind of make a day of it. I'd be like, this is my day, I'm gonna go write, spend way too much money on a matcha latte and just hang out in a coffee shop for 6 hours and write things. This was something that I frequently did. Without doing that, I'd been feeling really stagnant and it's been harder for me to motivate myself to write. I'm going out to write on my patio just for like a change of scenery, but I live on a very busy road and the sound of the cars going by was so loud that you couldn't hear what I was saying like at all. Plus, on top of that, I was literally just like my least articulate self. Everything that I said made no sense. It was like the least articulate a human being has ever been. So they were terrible clips. So I'm just gonna go through the things that I talked about to start off this vlog, or else none of this is going to make sense, and talk about kind of the stuff I was working through with my developmental edits. Looking at my phone a lot, it's just because I made notes on everything that I had talked about. Honey Vinegar, if you don't know what I'm talking about, talk about it a lot. It is a book that I finished drafting back in March, and I hope that it will be my debut novel. We've committed to publishing it. I'm manifesting it. I don't even say if it gets published. I'm in a when it gets published kind of mindset. We're manifesting, we're doing this. But in order to do that, you have to do more than just manifest thoughts. You also have to work on the book. I've been letting the book sit for a little while, a couple months. Been working on a book called Holding a Ghost. I just needed a bit of a palate cleanser between projects and wanted some time to just think, and think through the book and what I wanted to do with it. And then, kind of a couple months back was like, okay, it's time to get started on developmentally editing this beast of a novel. This is definitely the deepest level of developmental editing I've ever done. In the past, I've talked about how I find developmental editing to be the hardest part of the process, and it's my least favorite part because I find it frankly overwhelming. I felt like I was juggling 100 plates, and like I was trying to switch the order of some of the plates and also add in new plates and put down some of the plates without dropping any of the plates. However, I have gotten better at developmental editing in the past year or so, and I think it's because I've learned, Shaylin, just put the plates down. Rearrange them, then pick them up again. But it's a delicate process. I don't even think plates are the accurate analogy, because you can buy plates at IKEA for like $1. I don't know. Is it clear that I've never bought plates? I've never bought plates. I've absorbed most of my kitchenware. It feels more like I'm juggling Fabergé eggs. I have done developmental editing, I guess that's this deep, but never on such a large scale. So with this book, I did a pretty deep developmental edit on the first 5 chapters because I had those workshopped in university. I also did an editing pass that was pretty deep. Chapters 6 through 13, which is all of part 1. It wasn't as detailed because not all those chapters had been workshopped, but it was still pretty detailed. And then I haven't done a deep developmental editing pass on anything in part 2, but the first half of the book has already had 2 pretty solid developmental editing passes, so I feel comfortable developmental editing you know, especially with short fiction, I've gotten more comfortable doing it on that scale, but this is a whole book and it's quite a lot. My philosophy with editing, with developmental editing, is I don't have a set process for how I do it. I think editing, you have to build an editing process that addresses the problems that are in the book, which is always going to be different. Every book is going to have different problems, and I think you have to create an editing process and specific editing tools that will specifically address the problems in your book. First of all, I'm happy with the book. I was happy with the draft. I did discovery write it, but I was happy with the draft. I was not mad at it. I really liked what I was working with. I don't feel like it's a mess. I didn't feel like it was a disaster. Yeah, it was discovery written, but discovery written books don't have to be bad. I felt perfectly happy with it, especially for, you know, first draft. But it wasn't really a first draft because I'd edited quite a lot of it. But ever since finishing the book and it just sitting there, me just reflecting, I'd had a lot of thoughts and a lot of ideas, and I'd taken a lot of notes. So I did feel like there was a lot that I wanted to do, layers that I wanted to integrate to the story. Like, some of the edits that I wanted to do were just addressing problems. You know, this doesn't make sense, let's fix it. But some of it was like, I had this idea that I think could add a layer that I want to incorporate. Does the story hinge on it for success? No, but I think it rounds out the story and just will give it that extra layer of organicness and completeness. So there was a range of edits. Some of them were more like structural or more technical, and some of them were more deepening the story. So the first thing that I did was I updated my outline. So yes, I'm a discovery writer. I did have an outline. It was basically an outline that I would make as I was drafting. So when I'd finish a chapter, I would go add to the outline so that I had a running list of chapters and scenes. But I kind of stopped doing that, like, you know, 2/3 through the book, and so I had to just go update that. Plus scenes had moved, so I just wanted that to be updated. Then I turned that into a plot summary. So the plot summary was about 6 pages, single-spaced, didn't take long to do, and yeah, it was just a summary of everything that happened in the book. Then what I made is what I called a causality list. Like I was saying, I think you need to create tools based on whatever problems you have, and one of my biggest problems was causality, which is basically just the cause and effect relationship between the events of the story. And it's something I'm generally not very good at, but it was one of the biggest problems in Honey Vinegar, where there just wasn't a clear enough causal relationship between events sometimes. Consequences had not been threaded through adequately. There were points where this was the case and I'd kind of addressed it, but maybe not done a good enough job as I'd have liked. And I felt like to address this problem, I needed to go through the book and make sure that I knew the causality. I needed to find out where the causality was there, and I just hadn't made it clear, and where maybe there isn't causality. The list was basically, it was similar to an outline, but the way I did it in bullet points. So I would have like, scene A happens, and then I would say, this causes scene B. And I'll say, this causes scene C. And so I wrote out every scene, but rather than just what happened, I also like had the reasons behind them. So I was able to identify the cause and effect, the causal relationship from every scene within the book, which did make me realize that most of the causality is there. It just isn't all super clear, and I had to address the clarity, which is my Achilles heel. In this house, we write nonsense stories where nothing makes sense. And then another thing that I did, this was not necessary, but I actually like reverse engineered a plot structure, kind of like a Save the Cat or Hero's Journey, basically. I didn't follow any plot structures for this book, but I reverse engineered one, which first of all made me realize that plot structures are bullshit, because I reverse engineered one from my first draft and it sounds legit. You look at it and you're like, that checks out. That seems good. It helped me identify, causal relationship and pacing problems. The plot structure ended up being, it's actually kind of neat, like as a thought experiment. I've thought about sharing it, but it's turned out kind of cool. I call it like either the anti-hero's journey or the destruction of the hero, because it's a plot structure, but it chronicles a character downfall. But I have reservations about sharing it because I don't want to imply that like my first draft created a plot structure that has any kind of universal or wider application. Like, it's bullshit. Like, I bullshitted it, and I don't want to imply that like my book is any kind of template or pinnacle that you should follow. It just turned out kind of cool, and if anything, it was more of a useful exercise for me to examine the structure of my own book. So then what I did was I made my chapter by chapter breakdown. So I made it what I call a revision map. It's just a revision outline basically. And basically it looks like an outline where you have every chapter and every scene, but with the changes that you want to make, or new scenes you want to add, or delete, or anything, and just like notes for you on the edits you want to make. But it's broken down chapter by chapter so you can approach it piece by piece by piece, which I really need because developmental edits overwhelm me. I need to just look at it little piece by little piece by little piece. So I had taken like 8 pages of notes on my phone at various points, and so I also had to organize those. I split those up based on whether they were quotes to integrate, details just that would go in one scene, or if they were plot or character ideas. And then it was basically just, it was a mess. This was the hardest part of the process by far. Harder than drafting, harder than anything else, was making this outline. I said in my notes, I'll just read directly what I wrote here because I can't say it any better. I said, this was by far the hardest part of the process. You need to take conceptual edits and organize them in a way that doesn't ruin the foundation you want to maintain, but also fixes problems in a clear and actionable way. If you identify a large problem, you then have to break it down into actionable steps that can be applied to specific scenes. And it's just so much information to organize. I had so many different things I was looking at, and it was really quite a lot. This took a long time. It took many days, and I could only make a little bit of progress at a time. It took so much brain power. Like, it really was hard. So then I quickly just thought, finally, I would just chat about some of the main solutions that I implemented or changes that I'm making. So first of all was that I added what I'm calling hinge chapters. The way that I saw my book, and this is how I broke it down in the plot structure that I made, is that my book is in 2 parts. Like, it's in 3 acts. Part 1 is basically the first and second act, and part 2 is the third act, but I only have it in 2 parts just because there's a time skip. Obviously, it's also in chapters, but I see groups of chapters as arcs. So like usually 2 or 3 chapters together form a larger arc and are kind of connected. And I noticed that the places where my causality was weakest was in the points between those arcs, right? We'd arc, but the hinges between those arcs, I need to add stronger support beams at these hinges, you know, like they need to be held together with like a bolt rather than a staple. I added a couple new chapters. So part 1 just is an ever expanding complex beast, and part 2 I was able to simplify a little. I was able to condense 3 chapters from part 2 into just 1 chapter. So the number of chapters stayed the same in the end, which wasn't something I was trying to keep, but that's what ended up happening. So then the last thing is I'm actually probably one of the bigger changes, something that I didn't really anticipate. I had issues with one character, and I think this problem's worth talking about in depth. I have a character in the book, his name is Silas, and Silas is essentially like a mentor figure to Sybil, the protagonist. And I had initially added him because of a logic concern. And basically, so Sybil, does like herbalism. I had introduced Silas to be kind of a mentor figure to her in that regard because, I don't know, I couldn't suspend my disbelief that she would be able to teach herself, I guess. Silas's presence in the book causes a lot of issues because what happens when you have your character, your main character, Sybil, who is good at something. And then we have Silas, who is better at the thing that Sybil is good at. It really, really lowers the stakes in a lot of scenes. Anytime Sybil is in a situation where she needs to use her skill to solve a problem, or else she will face consequences, it's like, oh, well, if she can't do it, just go get Silas. You know, Silas was like, you know, the eagles in Lord of the Rings, why didn't they just get the eagles to fly to Mordor and drop the ring in? Or something? You know, Silas was the eagles. It's like, why don't they just get Silas? Like, literally, this is something that I was asking myself, and I didn't really have an answer. And so my first option was obviously just to kill Silas off. I didn't want to do that because it's hard to explain without spoiling the book, but it was just going to be one too many parental figures for Sybil to lose, to the point that it's like, this is heavy-handed. So, like, Sybil's dad already died, and then Silas is kind of like a father figure, and I couldn't think of a natural way to get him to leave the town. My next option was maybe Silas has never been there at all. But I needed him. However, there were also multiple moments where Silas he was just a problem. There were multiple times where he acted really out of character, and he was not working. So then I was looking at the book and I was like, okay, maybe what I need to do is take this character, Silas, and instead of getting rid of him, minimize his role, and then take the other parts of his role and dole it out to other characters. So that there's less weight on one person. There's not just one person who can save the day, so why don't we get him? We spread his role out. Like I said, I condensed 3 chapters in part 2, and that's because in part 2, there's a character who's introduced. His name's Jack. I didn't judge the book correctly because I initially thought part 2 would be as long as part 1. Part 1 is pretty complicated. 1 is a solid 55,000 words, I think. And there's quite a lot of characters and there's a lot going on. And so I had this character named Jack planned out as he was going to play a major role in part 2. He was going to be like the main side character in part 2. And I had this whole arc planned for him that was going to span 3 chapters, which in part 1 language is like 15,000 words. So significant character. Then I get to part 2 and it's very brief, and I realized that no, part 1 is way more than half the book. Part 2 is way more brief. It's way more simple. It's a really streamlined part of the story. It's kind of like part 1 is all these many threads all tangling together, and then they all come together at the break between part 1 and part 2. And then part 2 basically just it's like a clear path to the end. There's really just one arc. This character who I thought was going to be super important ended up not really playing as much of a role. And then I also realized this whole arc is unnecessary. Like, you could just remove them and the plot would make as much sense. I didn't need those chapters. Maybe I needed a couple little pieces of them, but I really didn't need 3 chapters of it. And so then I was like, you know what? I have this character, Jack. I think he's a good character. I like his dynamic with Sybil. Why don't I just write him into part 1, you know? Because I could write him out of the book, sure. Since his role in part 2 isn't really necessary. He still, I think, needs to be there in part 2, but minimally, not with this whole like 3 chapter arc that did nothing. And I was like, you know what? Maybe what I need to do is write him into part 1. He can replace Silas in a lot of these scenes where I feel Silas is acting out of character, because it wouldn't be out of character for Jack. The thing about Silas is, you know, he's like an adult, he's like a father figure. Jack is more around Sybil's age. He's like 18. They have more of a friendship. It's not out of character if it's him rather than Silas. And so that is how I fixed my Silas problem. Basically what I did, and I think that there are a lot of times that you can do this in writing, and sometimes it's hard, but if you think about it, a lot of the time, if you have 2 separate problems, you can fix both of them with one overlapping solution, but they need to work together. I had the Silas problem and I had the Jack problem. Jack, here's an unnecessary character, and here's a character that doesn't fit naturally into the story. There's a solution that can be made between these 2 characters, and I'm really quite happy with the solution that I came up with. And yeah, so that's basically where we're at going into the rest of this vlog. I just talked for 30 minutes, so let's hope I can cut a lot of this out. Hi, can you tell I'm having a crisis? Why am I having a crisis? Because I'm having a breakthrough. Why is this a bad thing? Because it means a lot of work for me. So I've been working on planning my honey vinegar edits, and it was going really well. I got on a good roll. I think I planned everything from where I left off, which was at the end of chapter 4, so chapter 5 all the way until what is now chapter 16. I added in a couple new chapters. It used to be chapter 13. So that's all of part 1. I finished part 1, and I felt pretty good about it. But then I just had a thought out of nowhere about how there are these 2 events, or not 2 events, there are a series of events in chapters 3, 4, and 5, and that I should probably reverse them. And yes, this is good, because I think it's just gonna be so hard. These scenes and events have been in place for so long. Like, this is the very beginning of the book. It's something that I wrote so long ago, and I felt like it was in place, and I felt so good about it. Chapter 5 has always been my easy chapter. That was my good child. Everything was so in place, so beautifully in place, that of course, I'm realizing now that I should. I think I need to reverse it, but like not entirely reverse it. I don't even know exactly how this will work. Chapter 5 needs to be the new chapter 3. Chapter 3 needs to be new chapter 4, and chapter 4 needs to be the new chapter 5. 5 needs to move to the start, and it'll bump them all down. This so annoying. Okay. Hey folks, it's Friday, July the 17th. I cannot believe it is the 17th. I don't know if anyone else felt this way, but March of 2020 was about 85 years long. And then April just didn't happen. And then May was also about 85 years long. And then June completely didn't happen. What happened? Where was June 2020? I don't know. I didn't experience it, if you asked me. And I just thought, okay, chronologically tapping into my internal clock, what's my circadian rhythms. Physically, I would guess that it's about June 6th. But no, it's July 17th. I don't remember what I said in the last clip that I filmed. I finished planning my revisions. I actually finished quite a while ago and I just haven't started. It takes so much potential energy to start revising a book. I'm gonna try to start it today. I'm going over to my grandma's. I'm in Vancouver right now, at my mom's place. Got here yesterday, and I keep just like going and tinkering with it, but I am generally happy with it. Some things that I addressed in revising it were created a clearer escalation of stakes. So I reversed a couple events, which I talked about, and there were a few events that I realized like they'd just always been in that order, and I'd never even thought about it. Doing some rearranging so that events had clearer escalation of tension, and also clearer causality, because I'm really bad at causality in my work. Like, things happen. This was the biggest trend throughout the book, and it was the biggest issue, is that the characters would be like, wow, this wild thing just happened. We'll just carry on kind of as normal. And it just wasn't really ringing true. So that's the main thing I ironed out by kind of doing a bit of reshuffling and also adding in some core beats that I think were missing. It's just generally stronger structural integrity there. Will I get started on that today? I would like to. It's like the afternoon and I'm actually going to go see my grandma while I'm in town pretty soon. I'm gonna pick up Vietnamese food and bring it to her place, because there's a Vietnamese place that I really like that is really close to here. And I am hungry and I would like pho. So it's later the same evening. I just walked back from my grandma. I listened to Half Moon Run's new EP while I was walking home, and it's a gift. It's so transcendent. Oh, my cat is here. She probably wants someone to give her dinner. I guess you haven't had dinner. Her name is Vin. We named her, me and my brother named her after Vin from Mistborn. I will feed you in a second. I was at my grandma's and I was just looking at her bookshelf. She has like a really eclectic book collection. I was just looking through her books and I found these two books that I asked her if I could take because they're perfect research for Honey Vinegar. So the thing about Honey Vinegar is, I think I've mentioned this before, it's set in the 1950s and 60s, late 50s, early 60s, in a made-up town that is fake, in like central northern BC. It doesn't have an exact canon location because it's not a real town, but you can discern that it's probably somewhere in the like Caribou. I saw these two books that are written by a friend, I guess a friend of my grandpa's, called Life at the Little Zipper Sawmill and Footnotes of the Caribou. And I guess he just like lived in the Caribou on a small farm. So a lot of it is around the same period of time of as my book is set, and it's like really just like, it's just his life. So it has like a ton of specific details. And the reason I wanted to take it is because I've struggled to do research for this book, because it's one thing to try to like research the 1950s, but it's another thing to research the 1950s in like rural Canada. Like there's less information on this like specific place, especially when it's like not even a real place. So sometimes I struggle with like specific details in what's realistic for writing about not just the time but the region. But then these two books are literally just full of specific details. This could literally be Sybil's cabin that she lives in the book. I think these are going to help me with finding some of the information that I need, but more than that, specific details that I don't know that I need yet. Super random, but that was just like a gold mine that I just stumbled across, and I'm very, very happy about it. Hello, folks. So it's July 21st. So right now I'm editing chapter 2. So I've started editing the book, which is great because starting editing is the hardest part. It felt like it took so much potential energy to actually get started on these revisions. I edited chapter 1 on Sunday. Yesterday we were driving all day, so I didn't work on it. I would have liked to work on it in the car, but my computer is quite old and the battery really only lasts for like a solid hour. I'm feeling quite good. I feel like revisions always feel like they're gonna be so much harder than they are once you get started. They're actually like so much more possible. Like revision sounds like so much work, but it feels like more work than drafting in my mind, but it's not. It's evidently not, especially because, you know, these are pretty clean chapters. Like, I'm calling this draft 3. This is draft like 10 of this chapter. Like, I have done so many drafts of this chapter already, like so many, so it's actually quite clean and I'm really enjoying it, to be honest. As soon as I started editing it, I've just been like itching to work on this. Right now I'm actually drafting a brand new scene, which is fun because I like drafting this book, but I also, once I get into the revision mindset, I'm like, what is new words? Writing in a whole character is really hard. Like, this is a character I mentioned earlier, the character Jack, who is a kind of a friend of Sybil's. It's wild that she has a friend. What? Yeah, this bitch has a friend. Up until this point, he hasn't really had like a full scene where he and Sybil are interacting. Like, there's just been like a half scene. So this is like the first scene that's gonna be them interacting. So I'm not sure if I'll finish this chapter today. Anyways, all this to say is, this book is getting revised, bitch. Hello, friends, folks, viewers. So, oh, sorry, it's so bright I can't see. We're going camping tomorrow. We're leaving in the morning. It's about 3:30 in the afternoon. I'm just hanging out, admiring the view. Reading. I just finished reading Girl, Woman, Other. It was incredible. Oh my god, it was so good. It was one of the most incredibly good books I've read in a long time. But I'm also on a streak of reading good books. Everything I've read has been amazing for such a long time. So I'm about to start Washing You Black by S.E. Dugian. My goal for today, obviously I'm not going to write for over the weekend because I'm not bringing my laptop to the campground. That would be a bad idea, and also, where would I charge it? The battery lasts an hour. So today I'm going to try to finish editing chapter 2, revising chapter 2. I also do have some edits for a publication that I've been procrastinating for like a month. On my story Beautiful Animal, which is forthcoming in Room. I have some edits I need to do on that I think shouldn't take very long because the story is only like 2,000 words. I'm gonna try to do those today because I kind of said I would get them in by the end of the week, but if you've ever been published in a lit mag, you will know that doing like the 8 minor line edits that they request of you when you're in a magazine is literally the hardest thing ever. There's nothing on this earth that feels like it takes more energy than doing like 5 line edits for a lit mag that would literally take 20 minutes. else is getting this, but for some reason this site and also the clouds gives me huge, like, the last series of Unfortunate Events books. I read those books like 10 times as a kid. They were my favorites. You know, like the one where they're stranded on the island? This gives me that vibe. We've got to the campground. I've trekked my crap up to this lookout, and it's lovely. So I'm just gonna hang out here probably all day. We got here a couple hours ago. It was actually raining. So I kind of just hung out in my tent for about an hour waiting for the rain to pass and read my book. So I'm just gonna chill, live my best life, read a book, probably start another book, and then maybe start another book after that book. I have a packed schedule the next few days. Hello friends! So I have not filmed a clip in a while. It's around 7 p.m. I spent a good portion of the day today working on Honey Vinegar, and I just finished revising. I've just finished my first pass of chapter 5. I do want to do one more pass of it, but I think it's going to be fairly painless. The chapter was a bit easier to edit than I thought it was going to be. So I haven't filmed a clip in a while. I've been editing the 3 chapters, 3, 4, 5, which, as I talked about earlier, so I won't rehash, got really mixed up and completely rearranged. There wasn't really anything particular to say other than just the fact that these chapters were really hard to write. Especially 3 and 4 were so difficult. Oh my goodness. Spent a lot of time just staring at the screen like this in pain over my own book. I got so confused. It happens when you start rearranging scenes and you're like, this works, and then you get to the scene and then you realize that all of the details now don't make sense. So I struggled through that, but now that I have revised those 2 chapters, I'm pretty happy with the flow of events. The next chapter is Chapter 6. Is called Feeble Species, and it's actually one of the new chapters. So there's like a scene and a half that were in the original book, but for the most part, it's all new content. I expect this will be one of the more time-consuming chapters, obviously, because I have to draft things from scratch. We'll see. I don't want to spend more than a week on this. I really want to make progress through this book. Progress has been a little slow because chapter 3 and 4 took a really long time. Like, normally it only takes around 2 days to edit one of these chapters. 1 day where I have to sink several hours in it to do the first pass, and then the next day smooth it over and do my second pass, which doesn't take as long. So it's like a day and a half of work per chapter, I find, or maybe 2 days depending on how intensive the chapter is, but chapters 3 and 4 were some of the more intensive chapters in the book. But I really don't want the entire process to move at that pace because there are 23 chapters and I don't want to be spending weeks per chapter. I would like to get this, you know, done at a certain point. I am excited to draft new content because I love drafting this book. Sybil's one of my favorite characters to draft. Obviously, I've spent years with her being the character that I was drafting the most often, so she's a very natural voice for me to write. But I'm a little worried because I do feel like I haven't been creatively on my game. Recently, I feel like just the richness of my prose hasn't really been coming to me. Like, I feel like my details and just the creatively, I feel like I haven't been thriving. Like, the prose is just not super spunky and fun like I would kind of want my style to be, and I just feel like I've been not super keen on a lot of the stuff I've drafted lately. I kind of just feel like my creative well is like really drained, and it's great to be revising because it doesn't require as much of the creative part and more like the logical part of my brain. Like, I'm approaching things more rationally, like we're problem solving rather than fully creating something. But for this chapter I have to do a lot of drafting, and so I hope that it turns out well. I don't know, like, for me, I talk about having a like well of creativity, but it's not necessarily linear. It's not like I have a certain amount and then it drains and then it needs a certain amount of time to fill back up. Sometimes it gets drained instantly, sometimes it fills back up instantly. You never know. I'm gonna hope that maybe drafting this chapter will refill the creative well, since drafting Honey Vinegar often does that. This is going to be the last chapter that I'm going to cover in this update. Hello, so it is, I haven't filmed a clip in a really long time. It's August 15th, and it's pretty late. It's about 8:30 in the evening, so it's a little dark. I'm doing a bit of writing. First of all, just excuse the talking in the background. My neighbors are having a party, which, like, social distance, you bastards. I'm working on the new chapter 6, which is called Feeble Species. I have been drafting the new content, which I was kind of worried about because I just haven't been happy with my prose lately. I feel like it's been lacking the pizzazz. There hasn't been any fun. It's just been kind of dull. I haven't really been too keen on my prose or like detail choice lately. So I was kind of worried about that. However, yesterday I did a word sprint with Rachel and Sarah. Rachel, she has an author YouTube channel. I'll leave a link to her. It's just Rachel Writes. They're awesome. Love them. So we did a writing sprint. We only had time to do one, but I feel like it clicked some things. I feel like Honey Vinegar is like my magic prose elixir, where whenever my prose just generally isn't working, starting a new Honey Vinegar scene, not revising, writing new content for Honey Vinegar always gets it working. I don't know what I'm gonna do when this book is done and I have nothing left to draft, because it's the only thing that makes my prose work. Maybe it's just that, like, I have a familiarity with the voice, but it's been like that from the start. I don't know, this book is just magical in that way. Right away within that sprint, I felt like I was just pulling details and language in a way that felt good. I felt like I was happy with the descriptors that were coming.
Hello. I don't even know if you can hear anything that I'm saying right now. I'm camping at the moment in Whistler, and it is raining like I have never witnessed before. It's about 10:30 at night. We got up here this evening, and oh my god, it is raining.
Been tricked. Yes, this is the same day that I filmed that long intro clip. It is Sunday, August 23rd, and I just wanted to film a wrap-up clip to end this vlog because this has been like a 2-month project. I'm in Vancouver. I know this is like the second time I came to Vancouver in this vlog. I just popped over for the weekend because I was going camping with my family. We just went up to Whistler just for the weekend. I've been working on chapter 6, which is called Feeble Species, and I'm actually feeling quite good about it. I think the last clip cut off really abruptly because my battery died, but or I ran out of space on my phone. Just have one more scene to write, and it's gonna be a super brief scene. Like, it's gonna be a baby scene. It's barely gonna take any time to write. I'm actually really happy with how this chapter has turned out. I was nervous coming into it because in the past, I'm often not as happy with the content that I come back and add after the fact. New scenes that I come back and add later, I'm often just not as happy with them, and I was really worried that this new chapter would suck and that I would hate it and the writing would be bad, especially paired with the fact that I hadn't really been too pleased with my prose lately, and I just felt like I wasn't writing good stuff. But I'm actually really happy with how this chapter is turning out. I feel like it's a really interesting chapter for the protagonist, Sybil. Sybil, I've talked about her before, but she's not a nice girl. She's pretty rude and judgmental, and she has a bit of a god complex. She's pretty aggressive. There's a lot going on there. A lot of the time throughout the book, we see her make the, I guess, objectively wrong decision. This chapter is kind of an anomaly because it's like, I'm like, are you doing the right thing? I see you trying to do the right thing. I can see what you're doing. Obviously, it doesn't work out that well. And she's like, well, never trying that again. Is she doing the right thing for the right reasons? No, but she's kind of trying to do the right thing in this chapter. It's a really new angle for her. I think I needed this beat of her acting in this situation, and I never had it before. I'm also really happy with how the antagonist is working out. So the antagonist in this story, there are a lot of antagonistic forces. The antagonistic person is a character named Whisper, who is one of Sybil's peers. One thing I was trying to do in this revision was to integrate him more, because in the first draft he actually wasn't present in very many scenes, and I just wanted him to have a stronger presence in the book, a little bit more, so he's quite present in this chapter. I really do enjoy writing his and Sybil's interactions. They have the most vicious interactions. Every time they interact, it's like, oh my god, one of you is going to murder the other. I think I don't know if I want to say misread Sybil's character at the beginning, because obviously, like, I've been writing with this character since late 2018. So it's been almost 2 years, because I started writing this book in, like, late September of 2018. Obviously, I'm gonna learn more about the character in that time, and I do think she was pretty developed pretty fast. Some characters take more time, some are pretty quick to develop. Sybil was pretty quick. But I do think there are two places where I kind of misread her. One of them I think applies to where she is at the very beginning of the story, but the inciting incident kind of jolts her away from that. I think I initially perceived her as being very emotionally muted. She doesn't really feel a lot of strong emotion of any kind. If I read my earliest character notes, she's described as almost unbiased, unemotionally observing her own life even. And that's not really accurate. First of all, Sybil is very biased. She's deeply judgmental of everyone. But I think I also misunderstood where she is emotional. I underestimated her ability to feel profound emotion, because it's true that at the beginning I think she is quite emotionally muted. And yeah, she's not really someone who's like, I seek joy actively. For her, neutral is happy. I do think Sybil has a pretty deep well for anger, and she's quite an angry person, and when she does feel anger, it can be like pretty volatile. Like, Sybil is pretty aggressive, emotionally and like physically. So that was one place where I kind of misunderstood her, and I've been adjusting that in the earlier chapters. It was only the first few chapters where I think I was really off the mark with that. And then the other thing that I think I misunderstood about her character, I saw her as being very apathetic of the people around her. She doesn't really care about other people, which is true. She doesn't really care about other people. She doesn't really like to invest emotionally in other people. She's not a very empathetic person. It's very rare that she will go, okay, I'm going to invest emotionally in you. For her, it's just not worth it. She doesn't really invest in people and their emotions. And I think I read that as an apathy about other people's existence, when really it's just she doesn't want to invest in them emotionally. But it's not that she doesn't want to know about other people. Sybil is actually really nosy. There are a lot of scenes in the book where she would reference people in the town and refer to them as like a girl in my class. Like, they weren't really characterized, because I had saw her as someone who didn't really care. She doesn't know these people because she doesn't really care. But I don't think that's accurate. Sybil is very nosy. I have been trying to make her almost more omniscient, like not literally omniscient, but more of a kind of omniscient force within the town, where she knows everyone, and she knows everyone's name, and she knows the connections with people, and she knows what's going on, because I think that's much more accurate to her. She's actually, like, she's very observant, she's very nosy, and she's very judgmental. I don't think she would be so apathetic about other people. She doesn't want to put emotion towards other people, but she does want to have knowledge about them. So that's something I've been adjusting a lot, is even as down to simple things like naming people. Rather than people never being named, kind of implying that she doesn't know them, because before that's how I saw it, was that she didn't know the people around her. Just giving names to everyone and including background details because she would know these things. She's lived in this town for a long time. She's nosy as hell. That's also helped flesh the world out more and make the world feel more rounded because she's actually paying attention. And I think I had a professor once who I think said that, like, a character, there are very few traits that a character needs to have, but a good protagonist is observant, probably has to be more observant than the average person in order to be a useful narrator. Obviously, exceptions to that, but in general, useful narrators are observant people. I needed to make Sybil a little more observant of the people around her. At the moment, I feel very happy about the fact that my word count is actually lower than it was at the start of the first draft. So I've added a whole chapter to the book, added a lot of scenes, and the word count is slightly lower than the first draft. That's good. I've been cutting a lot of words and like redundant words and redundant sentences and stuff. So hopefully I can keep that pattern up and the book will kind of remain about the same word count, if not go down a little bit, because I really don't want this book to be super long. And I was concerned when I initially looked at my outline and I saw how much I plan to add. I was like, oh God, this is like tens of thousands of words. I cannot do this. But it looks like we're going to kind of course correct, and the adding and cutting is going to kind of equal out to maybe like a net neutral. So that's all I've got for this vlog. Thank you guys so much for watching. This is such a mess of a vlog, honestly. Like, I've been filming these in poorer and poorer quality. Oops. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you have any questions, you can always send me an ask on Tumblr, and I'll see you in another video.